I have spent the last year and a half or so working on this strange little game called CleanFall. CleanFall is a roguelike tower defense where you have to gather supplies to survive in a harsh ecosystem. When I first started development, I knew there were three primary hurdles. The first one was procedural generation. I won't get too deep into it, but there were a lot of issues. But the next big issue was artificial intelligence. After an entire month of work, all I had to show for it was one really janky porcupine cat thing. The biggest time sink was trying to hand animate everything. I was also having trouble trying to figure out coroutines and state machines. Ultimately, this enemy was way too buggy and I had to scrap him in place for an enemy called the Slither Spine. This new enemy used procedural animation and his AI was a lot simpler while being able to do a lot more. This trend would continue as I created creatures like the frogs or the hornets. Finally, the last hurdle was items. A core part of CleanFall is both gathering and using items. This meant I needed to fully understand object-oriented programming and I needed to understand Unity's UI system so I could show the player what they have. Once I had gotten over these three hurdles, it had been about 6 months of development. Development would shift to a new pace. I wouldn't be spending all my time implementing new and exciting things. Instead, I started slowing down, adding more and more content. That being said, there were a few large-scale shifts that cropped up that would completely shift the game's direction. The first major change was how crafting worked. Originally, the player would gather a large variety of materials for crafting at these machines that would randomly spawn around the world. The problem was, it was almost impossible for the player to carry all those resources, and it was also really difficult to strategize which items they should look for. Instead, the player would become annoyed when a crafting machine would require some random resource they had never seen before. In the end, I opted to have the crafters only take in 2 resources, ore and fiber. Ore is found in the dirt, and fiber is dropped from monsters. Now that the game had been significantly streamlined, I wanted to add another layer of strategy to the game. This is where tower defense entered the picture. At first, I created a turret item as a one-off gimmick. It was very simple, and it didn't affect gameplay too much. Here's the thing though, I often found myself drifting toward the turret item, and I had tons of fun setting up turret defenses. After some conversations with my partner, I realized the game should lean into the tower defense aspect more. I decided to add a time cycle to the game, and I made a horde to attack you at night. Turrets very quickly became integral to your survival, and now they're a core part of the gameplay loop. This wasn't the end of the story though. We had a new problem. If we give the player a large variety of turrets, how are they supposed to carry all of them? I didn't want to increase the inventory slot count, so I needed another solution. In the end, turret alchemy was born. The game has 3 base turrets: gun turrets, flame turrets, and walls. When you place a base turret down, the turret behaves normally. But if you place another turret on top of it, it will craft a new specialized turret in its place. This means that the player can access any of the turrets in the game by combining any combination of simpler turrets. I also implemented a recipe menu to show the player all the recipes they have discovered. At this point, the game was really taking shape. The player had plenty to do, and the threats in Chapter 1 were engaging. There was one problem though. I was worried that the first chapter might grow stale as people replayed it over and over again. This is a very common problem for the roguelite genre. I decided to counter this problem by adding more depth to the player's choices. I needed to enhance the veteran's experience while keeping it easy for newer players. This is where stats entered the picture. It was a risky move. I wasn't entirely sure it was a good idea to add another layer of complexity to the game, but I decided to go for it. I added a whopping 18 stats to the game. We'll see if all of them make the cut, as it's a lot for new players to swallow. But that being said, the change enhanced the early game significantly. It added a new layer of strategy for veteran players, and all players now needed to decide how much to invest in upgrades that might take some time to pay off. This isn't mentioned anywhere in the game, but there are 3 intended subclasses the player might choose to work toward: the Technomancer, Consumer, and Weaponizer. The Technomancer focuses on deploying turrets and walls, the Consumer focuses on throwing weapons and drones, and the Weaponizer focuses on permanent weapons like the battery gun or flamethrower. These classes aren't mutually exclusive, so players can go for a middle-of-the-road build if they aren't sure about what they want to do. This new system adds a great deal of interest to Chapter 1. For high-level players, Chapter 1 becomes an interesting balance of finding things that work toward your build while seeing just how greedy you can be. As of right now, the development of Chapter 1 is near its conclusion. The private demo has been sent out to YouTubers, and now I can see how they are coping with the horrors I have crafted. It seems as though the game can be quite overwhelming, and the inventory seems to be annoying to manage. I have some planned fixes for these issues, but I need to make sure they are the right decisions. Sometimes trying to fix things can lead to bigger issues. Right now, my focus is on Chapter 2. It's about halfway done, and things are progressing much faster than Chapter 1. I don't want to spoil too much, but there are a lot of new threats and anomalies residing in Chapter 2. Players should never feel too comfortable when entering a new section. Thanks for watching. I plan to upload more devlogs in the near future, but I want to be careful not to spoil too much of the game before its release. If this project looks interesting, please go check it out on Steam and wishlist it so you can stay tuned for future updates.